Hey everybody, thanks for watching. We're going to take a look at John chapter 9, and we're going to do with this chapter what I've done with my videos in the past, and that is we're going to ask what the Old Testament context is, how the Old Testament is going to help us to illumine what's going on in this particular gospel. So we're going to look at three things as quickly as we can. First of all, we're going to look at creation themes as they come up in the Gospel of John. Secondly, we're going to look at the twofold connection that the themes of seeing and blindness have. And this twofold connection is one with the restorative work of the Messiah, which we see in the Old Testament, prophesied especially in Isaiah. And then secondly, we're going to look at the connection between sight and blindness as it is reflected in the theme of idolatry, and how those who worship false gods are resembling what they revere, how the blindness of these idols affect those who worship the idols. And then thirdly, we're going to look at the theological nature of geography as it's exemplified in John chapter 9, because we have a reference to a pool called the pool of Siloam, or in Hebrew the pool of Shiloach, and how the Old Testament roots of this particular pool are going to help us to understand kind of the in between the lines message that Jesus is sending by telling this blind guy, to go and worship in the pool of Siloam. So that's what we're going to look at. First of all, what's the story about? Well, very briefly, Jesus and his disciples encounter a man who's born blind. Jesus says that he's going to heal him to display the works of God. He does that by strange method. He spits on the ground and he makes clay out of this. And then he puts it on the man's eyes and says, hey, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. The guy goes, he washes, and lo and behold, his sight is restored. After that, there's this debate between the man and the Pharisees, and this guy's parents and the Pharisees, because Jesus did this on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees are opposed to any kind of miracles on the Sabbath. And so there's kind of a fight going on back and forth between the Pharisees and this guy and his parents. And then in the end, this man encounters Jesus again. They have a conversation. He comes to believe that Jesus is indeed the Son of Man, the Mashiach, the Messiah, becomes a believer in him. And then Jesus pronounces a judgment upon those who see but don't see. And then he talks about giving sight to those who are blind. So there's a whole lot. It's a long chapter. I'll let you read it on your own. John chapter 9. Okay, so first of all, the creation themes. When I talk about the Gospel of John, or really any of the Gospels, especially John, I always say when you're reading this Gospel, you have to have one ear always tuned into the frequency of creation. Because from the very beginning of the Gospel, the very way that John starts his Gospel, he makes it clear that he wants you to hear his Gospel from the perspective of Genesis. He starts his Gospel by saying, in arche, in the beginning, which those two Greek words, in arche, are the very same words that the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that's the way they start Genesis. So it's like him saying, in the beginning, right? Our mind automatically goes to Genesis 1:1. That's the way John starts his Gospel. He wants you to always read his Gospel by thinking about the Old Testament, in particular, creation, the creation account in Genesis. So how's creation working its way into John chapter 9? Well, in a couple of different ways. First of all, Jesus refers to himself, as he did in the previous chapter. So now in John chapter 9, he refers to himself as the light of the world. That harkens back to the third verse of Genesis chapter 1, where God's first words that he says are, Yehi or, let there be light. Now Christ comes as God himself. He is the Word made flesh, and he is now the light that illumines the darkness of the world. So that's a creation connection. Secondly, when he heals this man, he proceeds in sort of the same way that the Creator did in making Adam, right? You remember that when God made Adam, he made him out of the Adam. He made him out of the dirt of the earth. And so when Jesus restores the son of Adam, when he gives recreative sight, when he recreates sight in this man who's born blind, he does it by using, appropriately, dirt. He's engaging in an act of creation, an act of regenesis. And so he mixes the spit from his body with the dirt, this God spit, if you will, and this earthly dirt, he mixes that together and he puts it on his eyes, and the son of Adam is able to see again. So that's another part of this creation theme. And then the guy himself at the very end of John chapter 9 talks about how from the beginning of time, nobody has heard of a man born blind being given sight. So the man himself refers back to the Genesis, right? To the beginning of time, that this is the first time that this has happened since Genesis began. So those are some of the creation themes that arise in the chapter. And there's more, but I'll stop there. Secondly, the main thrust of this particular story, the main theme, if you will, that kind of works its way through everything, is sight and blindness. The man's born blind, he's given sight. The Pharisees are born with sight, but they're truly blind. Now, what's going on here? Two different things. Now, the first thing is this. In lots of different passages, in Isaiah in particular, the work of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, God's anointed one, who's often called the Eved Yahweh, the servant of the Lord in Isaiah, lots of different places. One of the things that the Messiah is going to do is restore sight to the blind. So when he comes, he's going to make the lame walk. He's going to heal the sick and is going to give sight to the blind. So when Jesus gives sight to this guy, he's more or less saying, I am the anointed one. I am the Son of the Father. I am the one who's come to fulfill all the promises that Isaiah talked about. Now, you're not going to realize that, of course, unless you have Isaiah on your mind when you see Jesus do this, but that's what's going on. Now, secondly, there's a second way in which this sight and blindness figures in from an Old Testament perspective. And this is very significant. So let me explain it as precisely as I can. In the Old Testament, you hear very frequently that if you worship false gods, you become like them. You resemble what you revere, as one author puts it. You begin to be like whatever it is that you worship. And this can be good or this can be bad. Of course, as those who are created in the image of God, God wants us to worship him, to reflect what we revere. But if we turn from him and worship false gods, we will reflect them as well. How does this work? Well, all over the Old Testament, here's how false gods are described. They have eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but they cannot hear. They have hands, but they cannot feel. They have feet, but they cannot walk. And then, as one of the Psalms puts it, those who make them will be like them. You get that? Those who make them will be like them. So just like the idols have eyes but do not see, so their worshipers will be that way. Just like these idols have ears but do not hear, so their worshipers will be that way. They resemble what they revere. So, how does this apply here? Well, in John chapter 9, as in lots of other places, when Jesus talks about people having eyes but not seeing, he is drawing upon this Old Testament way of describing those who adhere to the lie, those who do not worship that which is true. So this is really an insult to the Pharisees. Jesus is basically saying, listen, you aren't worshiping what is true. You're worshiping that which is false. You're clinging to the lies, and these lies to which you cling are affecting how you now stand before God. You're worshiping that which is blind, and so you're blind. You might have eyes, but they don't see. You might have ears, but they do not hear. So that's what's going on here with this whole contrast of seeing but not seeing, and having no sight, but now all of a sudden you're seeing. Then thirdly, what else is going on in John chapter 9? Well, we have this reference to a pool. And this pool is something that's really easy to miss. I mean, you can kind of get the impression that, oh, well, Jesus, he had to go wash the clay off somewhere. I mean, Jesus put dirt all over his eyes, right? He's got to wash somewhere. So it happens to be a pool handy, so he sends him that way. That's not the way to read geography. There's lots of different places Jesus could have sent him. He sends him to the pool of Siloam, which in Hebrew is Shiloach. Now, here's kind of the implicit message that's going on there. If you go back to Isaiah and read chapter 7 and chapter 8, there's a couple of different references to this same pool, the pool of Shiloach. First of all, Isaiah chapter 7, the prophet Isaiah is sent by God to meet wicked King Ahaz at the upper pool, which was probably the pool of Siloam. And there he confronts him and warns him to trust in God or else. Well, Ahaz, being Ahaz, doesn't trust in God, and so the or else is going to happen. And this or else is what is prophesied in Isaiah chapter 8. God says through his prophet, because Judah did not trust in the gently flowing waters of Shiloah, then I'm going to send upon them the flood of Assyria. This flood of attack and wrath that's going to come upon them. In other words, because they didn't trust in the waters that God had given to them and the pool of Shiloah there at Jerusalem, God is going to bring upon them this foreign flood of enemy power to attack them. Now, when Jesus sends this particular guy in John chapter 9 to wash in the pool of Siloam, and then he comes back and his adversaries, who are here called the Pharisees, because they don't believe in this messianic act of recreation, what implicitly is going on here is that Isaiah chapter 8 is being applied once more. Jesus is more or less saying, because you would not trust in God's work of restoring sight to this man, because you won't trust in what God did in the gently flowing waters of Shiloah, well, then he's going to bring upon you some other waters, and they're going to blind you, and they're going to attack you, and eventually they're going to destroy you. Well, it won't be the Assyrians, it's going to be the Romans. It'll be a Roman flood that overflows and destroys Jerusalem in AD 70. So anyway, that's some of the things. There's a lot in John chapter 9 we talk about, but I want to keep this as brief as possible. So we talked about the creation themes that arise there. We talked about the twofold significance of seeing and not seeing, one connected with messianic restoration, one connected with idolatry. And then thirdly, we talked about the geographical significance of Shiloah or Shiloach. So I hope this was helpful to you. I'm really going to try, I know I've done these videos in the past, I'm really going to try and do these every week when I look at the upcoming gospel reading in most churches. It's going to be John chapter 9 this particular Sunday in Lent. So thanks for watching. Please be sure, if you enjoyed this and profited from this video, to share it so that others can see it. And I pray that it's going to be helpful to you, whether you are able to make it to church. I know many of us can't because of everything going on, or whether you're at home and watch your pastor on a live stream or something like that. Anyway, I hope it's going to give you a little bit better understanding and a deeper understanding of what's going on in John chapter 9 from the perspective of the Old Testament. So thanks again. Y'all be safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned for more videos in the future. Thanks.